I'm just going to get right on into it. Bishop on Air. Like, subscribe, click the notification bell. We've got tons to tackle with the latest filing from Illinois State Police on the gun ban registry, hot off the press. The second notices in front of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. Now, before we get to those, let's just quickly do some background, because of course we've got the law that was enacted January 10th, prohibiting the future sale of certain semi-automatic firearms, magazines over certain capacities. And then you had months go by with lawsuits being filed, some lawsuits having the lower courts issue different types of injunctions, temporary injunctions, preliminary injunctions, temporary restraining orders, a final judgment out of Macon County in the Calkins case. So Northern District siding with the state, Southern District federal courts siding with the plaintiffs, all of that in the mix with the appeals courts. Now we've got cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. So that, of course, is kind of some of the background. But as that's been going on for months, Illinois State Police did not release rules when it comes to the gun ban registry, a registry that you're required to comply with after January 1st. If you don't, you could face up to a Class 3 felony for a second or subsequent offense of having a semi-automatic firearm that the legislature labeled assault weapons. And if you don't register those, then you could face criminal penalties. So let's go ahead and get into this, because while the court cases are still going on and the governor has Wednesday at 4 p.m. our time to respond to the Naperville plaintiffs in the U.S. Supreme Court, the Illinois State Police have filed new rules, and the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules fielding those second notice rules. So the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, if you go and check out their website, it's ilga.gov/commission/JCAR, and there you'll be able to see the meeting that's coming up, which is going to be December 12th. Mind you, that's the same day that the Southern District of Illinois is going to be hearing the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois case, where they have taken that case to the Southern District to essentially say, we need that January 1st deadline suspended while the case plays out. So that's still going on, of course, all right? And that's December 12th. But the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules will be meeting that morning. And on the docket, they do have indeed the emergency rules from Illinois State Police. So go and check out the website for the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. You can see the meeting agenda. And again, that takes you and lets you know that they're going to be taking up a whole bunch of stuff, including Illinois State Police rules. So the second notices. Now, while you have the lawsuits working their way through the courts, Illinois State Police, they knew that October 1st was the window for the registry opening by law with the January 1st deadline. They didn't file rules, emergency rules, until September 15th. So 2 weeks before the October 1st opening of the registration window. And they filed them as emergency rules. They didn't go through the normal course of rule making. So right now, these rules are in effect on an emergency basis. But they've got a second notice here that we're going to pull up. And this is, of course, the official filing from the Illinois State Police. And breaking it down, they just show you where they're kind of changing some things through the contents and some of the definitions. Some of the definitions that they have updated. And we'll go through this. Assault weapon, they define in the definitions portion assault weapon. They also talk about what an assault weapon attachment is. Means any device capable of being attached to a firearm that's specifically designed for making or converting a firearm into any of the firearms listed in the Act. For example, a pistol grip or thumbstock hole. Any feature capable of functioning as a protruding grip that can be held by the non-trigger hand, folding telescope, thumb hole, all of these, flash suppressor, grenade launcher, barrel shroud. These are rules that have been filed for a bit. But some of the new ones, assault weapon attachment and barrel shroud capacity, these are definitions they added to from the previous iteration of the rules. They also have in the definition endorsement affidavit. So they spell out all of these different definitions, including what is considered having possession under the Protecting Illinois Communities Act. And it says, having possessed such items prior to January 10th, 2023, means persons who possess one or more of the prohibited items under the Act as the result of a sale or transfer with a background check initiated by the department on or before January 10th, 2023, where the sale or the transfer was completed after the date pursuant to the Act. It also talks about what's considered an error, because if you are in error and you're receiving firearms from a dead loved one, you're inheriting those. So they spell all these out, right? What's a large capacity ammunition feeding device? They spell that out in the definitions. And then they go through and even more definitions. Muzzle brake, they had to correct the spelling of muzzle brake. Move to Illinois, this is interesting. It means to relocate from another state or country with intent of making Illinois the primary domicile, as evidenced by the Illinois driver's license or Illinois state identification card. They have to spell that out. Also, you've got what's PICA mean. They actually did put PICA in the definition section of the most recent rules. Proof of eligibility. Properly licensed firing range. This is interesting because this was a direct question that the federal firearms licensees of Illinois had. What is a properly licensed firing range? So Illinois State Police had to add this to the rules. And they say properly licensed firing range means an area that contains shooting stations or firing lanes, target areas, and other related components for discharging firearms at a target in a sporting event, for practice or instruction in the use of firearms or in the testing of a firearm, which meets the requirements set forth in law, as well as applicable rules set forth by the unit of local government with jurisdiction. It also includes licensed shooting preserves and public hunting areas operated or licensed by the Department of Natural Resources. So you could see the questions that were asked are getting answered to a degree in these second notice rules. Also, you've got, definitions of what's a qualified law enforcement officer. What does readily assembled, modified, restored, or converted mean? And I know that this is rubbing some people the wrong way. They say that shall means any assembly, modification, restoration, or conversion beyond those that would be required in regular maintenance that is fairly or reasonably efficient, quick, and easy, and does not require special knowledge or skill, additional parts or tools, or significant expense. Readily assembled, modified, restored, or converted shall not include assembly, modifications, restorations, or conversions that would damage or destroy the firearm or cause it to malfunction. So going through more of the definitions here, we're reviewing these second notice rules because December 12th is when the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules to review these. And they've got several options they could do. They could either accept the rules, they could object to the rules, or they could suspend the rules. If they suspend the rules, that could, possibly lead to reworking of the rules, and the January 1st deadline could be up in the air. We'll see what happens with the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, but that, of course, is action that's going to be taken December 12th, the morning of the Southern District of Illinois Court hearing the case that the federal firearms licensees of Illinois have brought forward. Reviewing more of this, they define what a stock is. They also move on to get into the nitty-gritty details about what the FOID requirement is, and an affidavit for filing with state police, what kind of firearms you have. Goes through some of the exempt classes. If a FOID application denied, these are some interesting things that they bring up. They talk about how you transfer a weapon. They also spell out here in some of the notes I gathered, if you have a firearm and your FOID card is suspended, you could give it to somebody who's able to take that firearm. But if it's a quote assault weapon, then there's limited people you could take it to. You could possibly take it to an FFL. You could possibly take it to somebody out of state. You could give it to law enforcement. But if you give it to law enforcement, then they don't have to give it to you back if your FOID card is ultimately restored. So some of the rules spelled that out. You can go through and look at that. Also talks about, if a person has submitted an endorsement affidavit and is manufactured as features that include different types of attachments. They talk about bolt, lever, pump action firearms that are not subject to the endorsement affidavit, even if manufactured firearms have features that, if removed, would constitute an assault weapon attachment. They further on go to talk about the endorsement affidavit and people who do not have to do that, right? The exempt class. And this brings up that 14th Amendment challenge that a lot of people have raised, including Dan Calkins, including Tom DeVore and his clients, about the equal protections that police officers this law doesn't apply to. Qualified law enforcement officers this doesn't apply to. Wardens doesn't apply to. Clubs, organizations, businesses, or companies, included not limited to federal firearms licensees doing business as sole proprietor, partnership, corporations, or limited liability corporations that own items subject to the endorsement affidavit provision of PICA. Again, does not apply to. You move on, and it talks about the leadership of such organizations. If that does not change, it goes into some of the transition of organizations. So I know a lot of clubs and memberships are interested in these components. Persons who are exempt from the endorsement affidavit provisions pursuant to the subparagraph are required to file an electronic affidavit should the circumstances given rise to the exemption change. So again, if somebody gets fired from being a law enforcement officer or whatever the case may be, however, retired law enforcement I think is on that list, right? Yep, retirees. So what if they're fired for bad cause? Well, I guess that's something that we'll see play out if indeed this survives a court challenge. Goes on to talk about the exemptions for official duties and, where, for instance, armed security personnel, private security personnel, members of the armed services. There was a change in here that's interesting that I definitely wanted to get here, and it talks about assault weapons used by persons exempt under this section in the performance of their official duties, transported to and from their official duties, secured at home or the place of business, or possessed for the purpose of attending training approved by licensed Illinois private detective agencies or security contractor agencies or the military, including travel to and from such training, shall be exempt from the endorsement affidavit provision so long as the person possessing a valid firearm control card, where applicable, and valid firearm owner identification card for the duration of their employment. Any person no longer employed by such an agency or not having an active firearm control card where applicable shall file an electronic endorsement affidavit prior to separation from the employment given rise to the exemption. So used to say that they would have to register their firearms if they weren't for their official purposes, but it seems that that's being modified in the second filing of the rules here. It also talks about exemptions from those who are going to shooting competitions. It also says that those going to shooting competitions don't have to show that they've given an endorsement affidavit to Illinois State Police. So it goes on even further and talks about a variety of other things. Also, when it comes to the affidavit, the endorsement affidavit, the person endorsing it shall include a FOID card. Now, this is new. When available, it used to just say the person filing the affidavit, their firearm owner identification card. But then Illinois State Police said you don't have to have a FOID card to register weapons. So they did put when available. That's interesting. And affirmation that the individual filing, what is that, an affiant, possessed an assault weapon prior to January 10th, inherited such items, moved to Illinois after January 10th, is filing an endorsement affidavit voluntarily. That's interesting. Again, are you really doing this voluntarily if you file? Also spells out you got to give the make, the model, and a variety of other information about the endorsement affidavit. Goes on to talk about January 1st, if the person is an Illinois resident who possessed an assault weapon attachment prior to January 10th of 2023, or 60 days after moving to Illinois, if the person was out-of-state resident who moved to the state, well, you've got 60 days to file. Talks about the penalties as well. And the penalties, again, between a Class A misdemeanor or a Class 3 or 4 felony, depending on the circumstance, these charges would be prosecuted locally. So then it spells out a variety of other things as well. Upon receiving, a suspension of a FOID card, talks about transferring those firearms to one place or another. If the owner surrenders possession to law enforcement agency and intends to appeal the suspension so that the assault weapon can be returned, if the appeal is successful, the owner shall notify law enforcement agency of their intent at the time of the surrender. Notwithstanding any other provision to the contrary, any assault weapon surrendered to law enforcement for safekeeping pursuant to a FOID card suspension based upon a protective order as defined by Section 1.1 and required by Section 8.2 of the Act, may, at the request of the owner, be transferred to an FFL of the owner's choosing if the appeal is unsuccessful. So the assault weapons may be sold by the FFL on behalf of the owner, consistent with PICA, and shall not be destroyed unless the owner fails to make such a request within 180 days of the suspension. So some interesting stuff there when it comes to transferring firearms in cases of orders of protection, and how you can't necessarily get those back, but you could possibly have somebody sell it for you out of state. So you can go through and read some of the details of all of those rules as well. A lot of other things about the transfer of, the possession of these items. All transfers of an assault weapon attachment, 50 caliber rifle, goes on. Large capacity ammunition magazines shall be made in accordance to the law. If a person is in possession of a certain type of weapon, ammunition, and attachments, and the person fails to comply with the applicable electronic registration, filling out those requirements, and the person shall either surrender the possession of the item to a law enforcement agency or transfer the item to a person authorized to purchase or possess such items as according to the law. If it's revoked, you got a FOID card that's revoked. It talks about how you transfer those items back and forth. Also, it talks about a transfer of an assault weapon or large capacity ammunition feeding device, and where you could make those transfers. And this is interesting. Any department or agency of the United States government. So what, like a post office? Also, private security personnel licensed under the private detective laws, you can possibly return them there. You can turn over firearms to practically anything. An FFL for export to another state or for sale to an exempt individual, you could transfer a firearm there if you don't want to register your firearm by January 1st. So much more in these rules, but again, these are the second filing of the rules with modifications and updates. I'm just going to take a look at some of my notes here, because some of them, of course, you just get really into the weeds when looking at all of the different types of additions, including additions like, as we touched on, what is a registered licensed firing range? And who is being impacted by this and who's not being impacted by this law. So a lot to go through here from the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. And here we go. We've got a few other pieces here, including requests for relief. If relief is granted by a court with appropriate jurisdiction or the FOID card review board, the department shall reinstate the petitioner's firearm rights, issue a FOID card and update, correct, modify, or remove the person's name. Goes through and spells out some of the relief and different decisions on FOID card review and all kinds of different rules. Again, lots of stuff here, including the entire list of firearms. And what's also important to note here is this entire list of firearms can be updated by Illinois State Police each and every October 1st. All right, this list shall be available on the Illinois State Police website and shall be updated on the website no later than October 1st, 2024, and every October 1st thereafter. So, as firearms owners, you got to stay close to these rules if you want to be a law-abiding citizen in the state of Illinois. Now, all of this, of course, is dependent upon what happens in the courts. December 12th, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules meets. It's a bipartisan committee of your elected officials. They meet December 12th in the morning. December 12th, virtually, the Southern District of Illinois is going to hear the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois challenge for a preliminary injunction to suspend the January 1st rule. Wednesday, by 4 o'clock, Governor J.B. Pritzker has to respond to the Naperville challenge of the gun and magazine ban. So these things starting to fall into place here, and we've got, less than a few weeks here before we've got the January 1st deadline to register. And while I'm doing this here live to tape, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Illinois State Police FOID statistics because I think it's fascinating and important. But if you look at the FOID statistics, it's still about 0.2%. So one other thing I definitely wanted to get to, I was provided with some of the questions and the responses that Illinois State Police provided. And in particular, you've got a whole bunch of comments that came in. A lot of people upset about the firearm registration, asking questions about oaths of office, and so on. But interesting, you do have those who were supporting it, including the Strengthening Chicago's Youth, where they talk about being, part of Laurie's Children's Hospital in Chicago to express support and provide comment of the proposed rules for implementing the Protect Illinois Communities Act. They go through and talk about the importance of the rules and how they support the rules. But then you look and see some of these other indications that I've gotten some public records of, and all of what was put into, quote, spam. And these are coming from, external suspected spam. I support the Protect Illinois Communities Act. And it's from Everytown. And it's email after email after email after email being put into spam. So these are form letters, right? These are form emails that have been put in. But you also have, again, the questions that came from like the likes of the federal firearms licensees of Illinois. And here you've got some questions that were pretty pointed. Why did the department elect to jam emergency rules in the 11th hour? It says the department's referred repeatedly to the frequently asked questions and illustrated guide for identification, and there's issues. So let's see here. I'm going to pull up the actual response to the federal firearms licensees of Illinois in that question and a whole bunch of other questions that they have. You've got the federal firearms licensees of Illinois asking why they jammed those rules last minute. ISP said the ISP complied with the PICA statute and the administrative code when completing emergency rules. Further, the last temporary restraining orders staying enforcement were dismissed on August 15th, and ISP filed its emergency and proposed rules 30 days later. The department has referred repeatedly to frequently asked questions and illustrated guides for identification, which themselves have issues I'd like to raise here. That's another question from the federal firearms licensees of Illinois. But regardless, just that answer, the ISP complied with PICA, the administrative code, when completing the emergency rules. Further, the last TROs staying enforcement were dismissed August 15th, and ISP filed emergency and proposed rules 30 days later. There's still challenges in the courts. There are still challenges in the courts. And obviously, I just laid out for you how all of those are going to start kind of falling into place here with not just what's in the Southern District of Illinois, but also with what's coming up with the U.S. Supreme Court and Governor J.B. Pritzker being asked to respond. So clearly, there's a lot more to be said about all of this. And I think that it's just something we'll continue to track. And I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me and doing that, even if I feel a little nasally right now. What's going on? Regardless, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Of course, hot off the press, latest rules from the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. They meet December 12th, the same day the Southern District of Illinois hears a challenge to the January 1st deadline, all while we watch what the governor's going to say when he replies to the Naperville challenge from Robert Beavis and Law Weapons in front of Amy Coney Barrett at the U.S. Supreme Court. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Long one, a lot of information. I'll link up to the second round rules here from Illinois State Police in the description, all right? Have yourself a great day. We'll be back live Thursday.